Good morning, everyone. Welcome along. While I wait for a few more people to join us. Look at that. Cup of tea. I think we've got people here. Bit of a slow start this morning, isn't it? A few little tweaky YouTube issues. Sorry about this, folks. Just trying to get this all sorted. Can everyone hear me okay? Should move the microphone a little bit closer, shouldn't I? There we go. There we go. Now we're in business, I think. Alrighty, I can shut that down. I can shut you down. And let's see what happens here. Alrighty. So, Jose says, was that the censorship image? Yeah, at the very beginning, that black bit at the beginning, wasn't it, mate? That was gold, eh? G'day, Sarah. How are you, mate? Good to see you again. My live streaming software is doing a few funny things this morning, folks, so I apologise for that. That's why I'm sort of looking around the room like a bit of a blind old stranger. Let me know when you're in the room so I can tell what's happening, because it's not telling me what's going on. Come on, streaming software, do your thing. Here we go. So, g'day, Jeremy. How are you, mate? I thought we'd start with a song, but before I do that, I'm having a cup of tea this morning in this cup that I think my in-laws, my mother and father-in-law brought back for my wife because they've got Swiss heritage. So it's an old man podcast, and it's too hot, just like that, and he's burnt his mouth. I'm going to hate that for the rest of the day, and I'm going to remember that. But let's start with a song, shall we? Why not? While we wait for a few more people to join us. This is an old Kiwi classic, but I know it was a bit of a hit overseas as well, so I thought we could probably play it today and get away with it. Let me just tilt the camera down a little bit. It's a bit better, isn't it? Alrighty. So this is Don't Dream It's Over by Crowded House. There is freedom within. There is freedom without trying to catch the deluge in a paper cup. There's a battle ahead. Many battles are lost, but you never see the end of the road while you're traveling. steps to the door of your heart. Only shadows ahead, barely clearing the roof. Get to know the feeling of liberation and relief. Hey now, don't dream it's over. Hey now, what a world comes in. They come to build a wall between us. You know they won't win. Hey now, don't dream it's over. Hey now, what a world comes in. They come to build a wall between us. You know they won't win. So there you go, bit of a Kiwi classic to start the show by Crowded House. Even though Australia tried to claim Crowded House as their own, we don't have a borough of that in New Zealand. My brother, my younger brother, up until recently actually was working for the guy who wrote that song in his studios. He now produces himself, so this is definitely a New Zealand band. Jeremy has said Hawaii's lockdown has been extended to May 31st. Are you opening New Zealand back up? Well, kind of. We've got this bizarre degree of levels going on in New Zealand. And so what we've got is we're in level 4 at the moment. And what level 4 is you are not allowed to go anywhere except for the supermarket and the pharmacy, basically. So doctors, medical care, and the supermarket to get food. And that's it. You're allowed to walk local and get out for exercise and stuff like that. There's no limits on going out for exercise, but you're not allowed to. You couldn't get on your bike and bike for 100 k's. That would be not allowed. You're not allowed to go surfing. You're not allowed to go fishing on the shoreline. You're not allowed to go hunting by yourself. So that's where we're at. Now, that was supposed to end last night at midnight. It was supposed to be a 4-week thing. They decided to extend it for an extra few days until Monday at midnight. Now, the reason they've done that is because of the fact that this weekend is Anzac Day, or Anzac weekend in New Zealand, and that's when we obviously remember our Anzacs, and we have a special holiday, and it's a commemorative weekend for that. And so what happens, of course, is people tend to go on holiday. It's a long weekend. So the government, in its wonderful, trusting nature, has decided that instead of just saying to people, hey, we're now going to shift down the lockdown and please don't go crazy, what they've decided to do is they've just decided to keep everyone in level 4 until 11:59 p.m. on Monday, which is when the Anzac Day weekend officially ends. And then on Tuesday, what happens is we go into what is known as level 3. And in level 3, or as some in New Zealand are calling it level KFC, you're allowed a few extra things. So what that means is that takeaway stores will open, but they can't, like restaurants, any restaurant that does takeaways is allowed to open, what they're calling contactless takeaways. Any restaurant that is that does what else? Coffee delivery and stuff like that, but or contactless coffee. So you order a coffee, and I guess you get your coffee without talking to anyone or touching it or anything like that. So those sorts of things are allowed, but apart from that, everything else is the same. Now that's supposed to last for 2 weeks at a time. They're going to review it every 2 weeks, but as you can imagine, that's sort of basically just level 4 with a few extra goodies involved. So no, we're not really coming out of lockdown. It sounds like we are, but I think what it is our government, perhaps they're not openly acknowledging it, but this level 3 thing seems suspiciously like what our level 4 should have been, and they just overreacted. And so now they've sort of pulled things back a little bit and added a few extra things in there. But it's kind of weird. You can send your kids to school in level 3 if you need to. So if you're an emergency essential worker, you've got no one else to look after your kids. But if you have got someone else to look after, you're not supposed to send them to school. It's kind of bizarre. You'd be able to go hunting again by yourself. You'd be able to go fishing. You'd be able to go surfing. But these rules are just bizarre. You're not allowed to take up a new sport, but if you have an existing sport, you'll be able to drive to go and exercise. Now, it's just, yeah, the whole thing's kind of weird. But that's where New Zealand's at. Thunder 1986 says people would just go buck wild, better to extend it. Yeah, I don't know about that. I think it depends where you are. I think there's what really we should have had was, I think we should have had less of a lockdown to start with. And I don't blame them though, because everyone freaked out because they didn't know what was going on. It was a new virus. You're looking at Italy. Everyone basically looked at Italy and thought, oh man, we don't want Italy. China lied, so we don't know what the full extent of it is in China. It looked okay in China. It looked pretty controllable. And then it hit Europe, and then all of a sudden it started to look a lot different to what China had led us to believe it was. And so they said, look, we better lock everyone down, keep everyone safe. But then Australia, for example, just across the ditch from us, they haven't gone to the same extent. They've got more like our level 3, what our level 3 is going to be. Taiwan's managed it without a lockdown. They have limited public gatherings. They have very good temperature testing. Contact tracing is really good, things like that. So there are ways of managing it, but you can't blame them. Hindsight's 2020. But I think they should have moved out of level 4 a bit quicker when they realised, because we probably knew about 4 weeks ago that we didn't need to remain in this intense period of this intense sort of strange lockdown. We could have actually got away with lesser of a lockdown. But anyway, that's the nature of the beast, and here we are. Jose says, oh yeah, so Thunder, you're an Aussie, right? They're opening up the schools in Australia again. Are they opening them up fully in Australia, or are they just opening them up to people who, like essential workers? In New Zealand, what they're doing is they're opening them up only to essential workers. So if you haven't, and if you haven't got anyone else to look after your kids, then they'll open them up for them. Jose says, any protests like those in the USA? No, we haven't really. We've got some interesting things happening. There's a lot of, we're not a strong, what I would call in New Zealand, we're not a strong civil rights type culture. We've never had, in New Zealand in our history, we haven't had a civil war. We've never had a major internal armed conflict. We've never had what you would call major civil rights violations. We've certainly had, the Indigenous people here in New Zealand, the Māori, have had legitimate claims about the way land was taken off them when the Europeans first arrived, and some crooked deals that were done. But our country's actually worked pretty well to redress that and to solve that issue. So we're not really a litigious culture. We're not really a culture we've never had a civil war, so we've never understand what it is to have your, we've never had a war for independence. So we've never understood what it is to have your rights threatened, and that's positive and it's a negative. The positive is we tend to be a bit more perhaps laid back in New Zealand. The negative is, of course, is that we don't quite value or understand, I think, our freedoms as much as we should, because we haven't had a history of having to fight for and defend them. And as a result, I think we're a bit complacent when we shouldn't be complacent, and that's a problem. And so what we've got going on is we've got no major protests, but what we do have is people, some people, I'm one of them, have used our public platforms to raise concerns about certain aspects of what the government's doing. And it's interesting to see the reaction, because at the moment our Prime Minister is being idolised. That's the best way to describe it. Honestly, you would think that she was Jesus, the way people are talking about her, the way the media is carrying on. And there are important questions, though, that need to be asked, because mistakes were made, and we were just lucky that those mistakes didn't turn into basically another version of Italy. And I'll give you an example. One big mistake was, it was only about a week ago that we put a mandatory quarantine on our border. You could come into New Zealand with the country in lockdown, and as long as you told the people at the border, you got given a pamphlet, and as long as you told the people at the border, hey, I've got a plan, I'm going to self-isolate, and you sounded plausible, they'd let you get in a taxi, I guess, and head to where you were going, and promise that for the next 2 weeks you'd put yourself in quarantine. That was crazy. That's just a failure to understand human nature. And yeah, everyone could see that, and they took so long to remedy that problem. Then there was another issue before that where they had before they locked us all down, they put some restrictions on the border, and they said they encouraged everyone to self-isolate. This is back in March, and they'd said that airline flight crews were exempted from the 14-day self-isolation. I remember saying to my wife at the time, that is crazy. That doesn't make sense, because airline flight crews are the one group of people, like our border is the greatest risk for us in New Zealand, small island country, the bottom of the world. We're not a major sort of thoroughfare destination. We're not a big country. We don't have high population density. So we've got a lot of advantages. And so our border is really important at a time like this, protecting that. And so it's the greatest risk, and the greatest risk group at that greatest point of risk are airline flight crews, because they interact with lots of different people on a daily basis. They're constantly coming and going. And so they were the one group, though, that were exempted. And sure enough, we've got a cluster of the virus in our country down at the bottom of the South Island. There was a wedding held some weeks ago, and a cluster broke out there. It was someone had it, they took it to the wedding, and there's 2 fatalities. 2 older people have died as a result of that cluster from the virus. Now, the way that cluster started was an air hostess, an air steward, he had the virus and he took it to that wedding. So he brought it into the country, took it to that wedding, and then a cluster started. Now, I don't blame the guy, because he did everything according to what the government rules were at the time. It's just the government rules were not well thought out. So the problem is, at the moment, you can't really sort of raise questions. Well, you can, like I've been doing, but man, you got to be prepared to stand your ground and cop a lot of flack. But there's no protests as such going on. We have some interesting things happening up north, in the North Island, the northern part of our country, where some of the local Māori tribes have set up what are illegal roadblocks. They've set up roadblocks, and they're saying that the only people who are allowed in are residents, and they're intimidating people at these roadblocks. They're stopping people from travelling on public highways. That is illegal in New Zealand. Even the police don't have the power to do that. They have to get special exemptions under special acts to be able to do that. So they have private people doing that. And our Prime Minister just sort of said, well, as long as they're not intimidating people, it's all good. It's just kind of crazy. So yeah, but there's no what I would call major protests like you've probably seen in Australia. CJam says, how's everyone? What is self-isolation like? In the UK, people talk about getting drunk all day and watching Netflix. I've been working full time. Well, it's interesting, eh? Like, I've got a family of 5 kids. My wife and I, we're sort of schooling from home at the moment. There's lots of online resources coming in to do that. I still, a lot of my work anyway was in the online space. And I'm moving a lot of my work, my public speaking and formation work that I do. I'm planning and working to build more of that into the public space. So for me, it's just, I've been so busy. I just haven't stopped. Other people though, where they say you're a tradesman, you've stopped, you've come to a grinding halt. And some have coped really well with that. Others, clearly it's not good at all. CGM says this CVB is better end soon. If I hear one more story about self-isolation, I'll go right past the cervic en route to ironic and end up slap bang and sardonic without even taking a breath. That's it. Look, mate, I think that it's going to be with us. It's going to be with us for months to come. The reality is they may never ever find a vaccine. People are talking up that as the sort of the end point, but I've read lots of good articles in the last couple of days from experts in this field who are saying that it's one article I read the other day, a guy who works in this field says we haven't created a coronavirus vaccine yet, and there's a reason for that. It's because it's notoriously hard to do. So if we do it for this one, it'll be quite amazing. And then there's all these different strands of it now floating around, which makes it even harder. One sage piece of advice that I would recommend from this book here, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Very good book if you haven't read it. Is he talked about the fact that people in the prison camps who set themselves an end date for when they thought their liberation was going to come and all of the oppression and stuff for their imprisonment was going to end. When that end date arrived and they were still in prison, a lot of them just lost it. They couldn't handle it. Everything broke down at that point for them. And so he said what he learned to do and what he did very quickly was he didn't set himself. He acted as if this was going to be the remainder of his life, and that he was going to find his freedom even in the midst of this as his new life. And I think it's a sage piece of advice right now. But the reality is we can't carry on with the lockdown forever. That's regardless of what happens with a vaccine, we can't exist as human persons in a state of lockdown. There's just no way that can happen. We're going to have to sort of eventually sort of venture out our doors and try and take strategic safety measures, but also carry on with a normal, humane existence where we actually live as human beings, not as caged animals. Just bizarre. Sean says, my wife and I are working full-time in the US. What do you do, Sean? So are you an essential worker? Are you working from home? What do you do when you say you're working full-time? You also mentioned that your niece, an infectious disease nurse, just got laid off, lack of work. That's kind of weird, isn't it? I would have thought they were one group of people who would be in high demand right now. And especially for what's going to come next. There's going to be a big economic challenge ahead of us. And then there's also going to be the fact that hospitals are going to start to get, no doubt, overrun with people who have put off their surgeries and everything else while they were under lockdown. Like in New Zealand, there's lots of our hospitals are empty at the moment because they've been cleared for coronavirus. One thing I wondered about that was, why didn't we look at the option of setting up special hospitals that would just deal with coronavirus cases? So if you had a case, that it wouldn't go to the normal hospital, you'd be told go to this place, even if it was a field hospital, and they would address it there, and then sort of try and keep more of the normal functions happening in those other hospitals. It's weird to me that we didn't think to segregate the healthcare system like that. I mean, I know that's a big task, but these are big times, and it requires some innovative and creative out-of-the-box thinking, and I would have thought that might have, I mean, to me it seems obvious, but maybe I'm missing something here. But yeah, anyway, so Sean, I'd love to hear what you and your wife are doing. I'm having a cup of tea today for those who missed it earlier on. Let's see if it's cool enough now. Much better. Peppermint tea. We've got these tea bags in New Zealand that have these nice little comforting messages on them. Made by a company called Red Seal, and so you get your tea bag and it's supposed to say something nice and positive. So it says, tea is a hug in a cup. How's that for classic? Tea is well, I don't really think that's true, because if you tried to have a cup of tea giving you a hug, it'd burn you. Stupid. Let's play another song, shall we? Good idea. While we're waiting for a few more people to join us. Feel free to leave a tip in the tip jar. There's a link below if you want to do that. Let's go to a band that I'm not the biggest fan of, but in times like these, any port in a storm, bit of Coldplay. When you try your best, but you don't succeed. When you get what you want, but not what you need. So tired, but you just can't sleep. Stuck in reverse, and tears come streaming down your face. When you lose something you can't replace. When you love someone but it goes to waste. Will guide you home and ignite your bones. And I will try to fix you. Too in love to let it go. But if you never try, then you never know just what you're worth. There you go. Coldplay. A bit of Coldplay on this Thursday morning, or is it Wednesday evening, wherever you are. You can't beat a bit of Coldplay. It's not my go-to band, but any port in a storm. Thank you, Jose. Very kind of you to say. It's good to know there's one audience member clapping out there. Sean says, I'm an engineer for a Fortune 50 company. Fortune 500 company. Mate, engineering. You guys are going to be valuable soon, I would say. Hopefully so. It's going to be interesting, to see what comes next. That's the interesting part of all of this, the interesting challenge. Bit of Star Wars related palaver. We may as well talk about Star Wars. So let me just switch on this picture-in-picture so we can see this. Geeks and Gamers just tweeted this out earlier on. I just saw it before I came on here, so I thought we'd have a look at it now. What's going on here? Sorry, I'm just going to do something funny here. What are you doing? I know what you're doing. There you go. Okay, so Leslie Headland, co-creator of Russian Doll / Netflix, is confirmed as the showrunner for an all-female focused Star Wars series for Disney+. Thoughts? I'll give you my thoughts. Do they still not understand their target market? Do they still not understand what happened over the last 5 years or so? This is just bizarre to me. Yeah, I don't see much of a strategy in this, that's for sure. And you'd think that they would have learned after The Mandalorian that where exactly their fan base is at and what they're looking for in Star Wars. I'd say that this will be, it'll be, even if it's toned down, it'll be woke. It'll be woke. And it's just an attempt to ram politics into mythology, and never works. Mythology's supposed to sit above politics. It might reflect and it might contemplate various aspects of human politics, but mythology shouldn't be political. So you look at something like Lord of the Rings, and there's no doubt there is great reflections in there on human politics, and you think of the way different kings act and different leaders act in this time of crisis in this mythology that is the Lord of the Rings and what happens in Middle-earth. So there's no doubt there are reflections on virtue and on human nature and the human condition and how that can play out when it comes to societies and the leadership of people. But to politicise Lord of the Rings would have made an absolute disaster. So if Lord of the Rings had just been a piece of political commentary, simplistic, shoehorned in politics of the day, we wouldn't be talking about it right now. We just wouldn't. It would be done and dusted. So yeah, I don't understand this. I don't see how this is a productive move for Star Wars, and it just says to me that they probably still haven't learned their lessons at all from what happened over the last 5-6 years or so. That they're still acting as if somehow producing these sort of targeted political propaganda pieces is going to do anything for them. It's just astounding. But I guess that's the nature of the human blind spot, We get into... I was reading a fascinating article about this just the other day, because it applies to what's going on in the world right now. Is one of the biggest weaknesses that we have as human beings, whether you're an expert in the field or whether you are just a layperson, is that we have a naturally occurring blind spot, and we fail to recognize what we don't know. We overestimate our level of awareness more often than we should. And so I'll give you an example of this. I enjoy hunting as a hobby. If you're out hunting in the bush and you get lost, one of the worst things you can do is just go, I know where I am, I'll just keep walking. You're overestimating. There's a blind spot there in your knowledge, and you don't even realize. You think you know more than what you actually do. So what you've got to do in that situation is you've got to take proactive action based on an assumption that you don't know as much as you think you do. And that blind spot is obviously a big talking point right now with what's going on in the world. Sarah says, my answer to Star Wars is this. Yeah, that's about it, right? But it's also true of things like this, with a big corporation that's convinced itself that this is the way to go, that they're on this trajectory, they're saving the world, they're I don't know, they probably think they're helping young women, they're helping young men, they're bringing about a better state of culture. And they're just so convinced of it, but they're not gonna let it go. they're just not going to let it go because there's a blind spot there. It's like a person wandering around in the bush who thinks they know where they're going, and then all of a sudden they find themselves totally out of food, in a far worse situation, cold, the night time is setting in, and they really don't know where they are now. And so here's the crazy thing too, to stretch this analogy about people who go hunting even further, is that if you get lost in a situation like that, it's amazing the number of people who, when they just keep moving when they shouldn't have, and they do the wrong things when they should. I know where I am, I'm just going to keep going in this direction. And it's amazing how close they actually come to getting themselves out of a pickle, but then they just, because of that blind spot, they just keep on going off in the wrong direction, or they don't check over the next hill, or whatever it is. And so, it's interesting. I think Disney's got the same problem now, where they are so close to actually solving this issue, especially now, because now there is no more, the trilogy's over. And they've got the freedom now to actually do a reset here. They've got freedom that they never had before. They could actually reset the trajectory. It's like someone who's lost in the bush, and they are only 100 meters from walking right out of the bush onto a major and very busy highway, but they don't realize that they're right there. And so they just carry on walking alongside in the highway in the dense bush, and then start to veer off in the other direction. It's to me, that's what this looks exactly like. It's so bizarre to me that they haven't actually corrected for this. Just astounding, man. Just astounding. But anyway, that's Disney for you. That is Disney for you. That's my thoughts on that. Man, I'm loving this cup of tea this morning. Peppermint tea. Can't go wrong. So how's everyone else coping with their lockdown? Are you in lockdown wherever you are? Are you in quarantine? What's happening in your part of the world? I'd love to hear from you. I'm going to talk about my DVD collection in a minute. But I'm going to play a new original song soon too. But before I do that, let's play another piece of music. Let's go for a good old 2000s classic. A bit of a party anthem. Jose says it'll be, what did you say, Jose? An Empress Holdo series. It'll be gold, won't it? The true story. I bet you they'll do something like that. You know it. You know it's going to be that level of gold. So let's go for a 2000s classic. Save Tonight by Eagle Eye Cherry. So take this wine and drink with me. Let's delay our misery. Save tonight, fight the break of dawn, come tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be gone, save the night. Fight the break of dawn, come tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be gone. There's a log on the fire, and it burns like me for you. Tomorrow comes with one desire to take me away. It ain't easy to say goodbye, so darling, please don't start to cry. 'Cause girl, you know I got to go, and Lord, I wish it wasn't so. Save tonight, fight the break of dawn, come tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be gone, save tonight. Fight the break of dawn, come tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be gone. Tomorrow comes to take me away. I wish that I could stay, but Girl, you know I got to go. And Lord, I wish it wasn't so. Save tonight. Fight the break of dawn, come tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be gone, save tonight. Fight the break of dawn, come tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be gone, save tonight. Fight the break of dawn, come tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be gone, save tonight. Fight the break of dawn, come tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be gone, save tonight. Good old Eagle-Eye Cherry, man. He was a one-hit wonder, wasn't he? But it was such a great song. CJM says, trying to help people by pushing evil sounds like Hollywood to me. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I was watching a documentary the other night, actually, about The Shining. Was it about The Shining? It was about The Shining. I've been watching some in-depth stuff on The Shining lately. And there was a piece of side commentary about something else. What was it? It was something to do with the Manson family or something. And these various Hollywood actors who are right involved in that quite intense activism, left-wing, sort of not just left-wing, but communist activism scene. It was quite astounding, eh? Some big names too, guys like Donald Sutherland and Warren Beatty. And yeah, man, some things never change, eh? Into Destin 8 says, that song was modern when I was young. Yeah. I remember playing that song, man, in my car. Before we even had a CD player in my car. It was an old tape player, I think, actually. And then I graduated to CD. I'll tell you a funny story about one of my first cars. I had this car, and I did this absolute home job on it, where I put 10 speakers into it. Now, you think, oh, this guy was a bit of a car stereophile. I kind of was, but I was also quite poor. So this first car I had, second car I had, it was real home job. So I made my own subwoofers. It was an old Toyota, 1972 Toyota Coupe, and I made my own subwoofers. I was butchering secondhand speakers where I could, creating amps to run them. It was hilarious. This car was so overgeared. And then I thought I'd do something really cool. And I would get some of that stick-on lettering. You know, you do it letter by letter that you can add to vehicle sign writing letterings, basically. They used to call it letter-set, I think. And I'd get some of that, and on the back across the boot of my coupe, I'd write Bassman. Because this car, it would doom, 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 and it was doof, doof, and the panes would rattle. Because what you're supposed to do if you do that to a car is you're supposed to do things like fill in the door frames with insulating foam, expansion foam and stuff like that, so you actually enhance the sound inside the vehicle and you don't get all the rattling and everything else. I couldn't afford that, so I just had 10 speakers in this car and Bassman across the back. And I was a young lad, and I thought I was quite cool. And I'd drive around town with my car, rattling away, and Bassman across the back. I was a bit of an idiot. And then one day, I sold the car, and I got a new, much more mature vehicle, a Toyota station wagon. And I went to the bank, to the ATM to get some money out one evening. And there was a couple of local hoodies were there with their skateboards, and they were doing stupid things. And one of them gave me the finger just out of the blue, just flips me the bird for no reason. Like, I'm not looking at him, he just flips me the bird. And so I stopped my car, came to a screeching halt. I'm not going to let some young larrikins talk to me like that. So I got out of my car and I was like, have you got a problem, buddy? And then one of these other kids who was with him goes, hey, I know you. You're Bassman. And I was so embarrassed that I got back in my car, didn't say another word, got back in my car and just left. Stupid kids. So, yeah, that's the story of Bassman. And wow, I'd never ever advise doing something so silly. Raro Penadin says, I grabbed my axe and played along with your fun times. Yeah, it is. It's like that, eh? And it's such a good song too. It's such a great party song. But yeah, that was the life of Bassman. Tessin 8 says, damn, now I prefer your version. yeah, young punk. But it was so embarrassing, As soon as he said, "Oh, you're bass man. You used to live down the street from me." I was like, "Oh no, I'm leaving. I'm leaving." Man, driving around with, who remembers La Bouche? You know, la da da dee da 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 da, be my lover. Those guys, remember those guys? Yeah. So I'd be driving around with that stuff pumping away. Yeah, man, classic. What a goose. I've got this funny app open. It keeps popping up messages where it shouldn't. So apologies for that if I look off screen. I'll tell you what, let's play a bit of Irish, shall we? If you want to leave a tip in the tip jar, there's a link below for PayPal. Knowing Facebook, I'll probably get pinged for playing covers, so and have to give all that money to someone else. So you've a few meager pesos. So yeah, if you want to leave a tip, please use the PayPal. One of my favourite things to do, I've got a mate of mine, Chris, who's a fiddle player. And him and I often play Irish gigs together. So let's do a bit of Irish, shall we? As I was going over far famed Kerry Mountains, I met with Captain Farrell and his money he was counting. I first produced my pistol and then produced my rapier, saying stand and deliver for you all my boats, even was shouting dabba-doo dabba-da. Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. I counted out his money and it made a pretty penny. I put it in my pocket and I took it home to Jenny. She sighed and she swore that she would never deceive me, but the devil takes the woman, for they never can be. Sing was shouting dabba-doo dabba-da. Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. I went into my chamber all for to take a slumber. I dreamt of gold and jewels, and for sure it was no wonder. But Jenny drew me charges and she filled them up with water, then sent for Captain Farrell to be ready for the slaughter. Was shouting dabba-doo dabba-da. Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. It was early in the morning, just before I rose to travel. Up comes a band of footmen, and likewise there's Captain Farrell. I first produced my pistol, for she stole away my rapier, but I couldn't shoot the water, so a prisoner I was taken. Was shouting dabba-doo dabba-da. Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. If anyone can aid me, 'tis my brother in the army. If I can find his station in Cork or in Killarney, and if he'll go with me, we'll go roving in Kilkenny, and I'm sure he'll treat me better than my darling sporting Jenny. Was shouting dabba-doo dabba-doo. Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. Was shouting dabba-doo dabba-da. Whack for the daddy-o, whack for the daddy-o, there's whiskey in the jar. I was going over for famed Kerry Mountains, I met with Captain Farrell and his money he was counting. I first produced my pistol and then produced my rapier, saying stand and ring dabba doo dabba da. Whack for the daddy-o. Whack for the daddy-o. There's whiskey in the jar. I heard there was a secret chord that David played, and it pleased the Lord. But you don't really care for music, do you? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, and the major lift. The baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof. Her beauty in the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to a kitchen chair. She broke your throne and she cut your hair. And from your lips she drew the hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. We're shouting dabba doo dabba da. Whack for the daddy-o. Whack for the daddy-o. There's whiskey in the jar. We're shouting dabba doo dabba da. Whack for the daddy-o. Whack for the daddy-o. There's whiskey in the jar. There you go. Now, if we were in a pub, we would still be going. That turns into just this massive melody whenever I'm playing that live with my mate Chris. Johnny Cash, Leonard Cohen, you name it. Man. Guy random says, I bet you played Claved Up in your own mobile. What are you accusing me of? You think I'm some sort of hoodie? Let's just say. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Leonard Cohen is off his value. He'd probably be turning in his grave if he heard us do that Irish version of that song. We do the whole thing in a pub. But in a pub it goes off. But I tell you what, poor old Leonard. I love Leonard Cohen. I've got a lot of his stuff in my collection. And I consider that a disrespectful homage to a great song. Because to be fair, that song there, by the way, thank you CJ for the live chat. I don't know if I'm going to get pinged for copyright, folks. So if you do want to leave a tip, use the tip jar, the PayPal link below, please. Because I could lose all of this, but it's just fun doing it. That song has been so badly blimmin' covered and copyrighted, and honestly, there's so many stupid versions of that. Remember that phase that we went through? It was probably about 10 years ago, wasn't it? Where Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah would turn up in every single weekly drama show. Middle of the road drama show, those shows that ended with a current pop song. And I remember there'd be I think the OC was one of the first to start that trend, and this all these various versions of people. Shrek reignited. I think it was Shrek, to be fair, that reignited and woke up a whole generation of people to the song who'd never heard it before. Guy Random says it'd go well with the 10 speakers. It was embarrassingly bad. What a mistake. What a disaster. It's getting quite warm in here. I turned off the heater. We're actually having some really good weather here. And that is awesome. Because it's a shame we can't go anywhere, but it's kind of awesome when you're in lockdown to have good weather. I was going to play an original song, but no, I won't. I'll save that one till last. I'll play the original song after I talk about my documentary collection. Let's do that now. Let's talk about documentary. Let's get a bit more sedate for a little bit. And I'm just gonna. I thought I'd do something totally stupid and off the wall, and talk about my DVD documentary collection that I have. And I haven't added to in a long time, and I'm missing one. I've realised I'm missing one. There's a really good documentary in my series that I've got. I'll actually remind me. I haven't got it with me. Yeah, Jose says, have you heard about the sequel to Train to Busan Peninsula? A trailer came out earlier this month. I have. I've watched the trailer, and I'm really worried that they're going to ruin it. Train to Busan was a great film. I watched it again the other night, actually, and I'm going to do a video, I think, on that, because there's some really great little foreshadowing commentary that's worth focusing on in that film. It's actually a really, really good movie. It's got quite a deep theme about fatherhood in it. So I'm going to. I watched the trailer for Peninsula for the sequel to Train to Busan, and my gosh, I'm not hopeful. I'm not hopeful. It looks like they've turned it into something else. It might be really good. It might just be a bad trailer. I don't know. These things happen, right? Really good movies can have bad trailers. Anyway, let's talk about my documentaries that I've got sitting here in front of me. So, I went through this phase of, remember the History Channel? History Channel had some great stuff on it, and then it sort of went and became the Conspiracy Channel for a while, I think, didn't it? So anyway, the History Channel, I went through a phase of before digital really took off, and you would buy stuff on DVD, and we had a local outlet store that would sell stuff, that would get stuff from all over the place, and you could get it really cheaply from them. They would bulk buy the stuff, and you'd get stuff that was hard to get a hold of on DVD, and you'd pay like $5 for a set, or even less. I'd always be browsing their dollar bins, and there'd often be great docos in there. So I picked up a few of these things. Like this is the Ancient Rome triple pack, triple DVD collection. Back in the day when that meant something special. But Ancient Rome, the Power and the Glory. And it's actually quite a good series about the rise of the Roman Empire, right back from the very beginning, and then the fall of the empire. And it's a bit more academic. I've got another one I'll show you in a minute. Actually, no, I'll show it to you now. This one here was quite good. I enjoyed as well, called Rome, the Rise and Fall of an Empire. And that was a History Channel one. This is, how many DVDs is this? Oops. Four DVDs. So there's a bunch of episodes on there. There's things that frustrate me about the History Channel stuff often. This is great. The recreations in this was quite good. And you had some pretty good academics, but often you only get a superficial reading of these histories. And so there's a little bit of that in places, but overall it's one of the better ones, which is why I chucked it in the collection. I thought it was well worth... C. James says jump around. And what did Guy Random do? Back it up, back it in, let me begin. Yes, yeah, you would have heard me coming. Okay, so this one here, Rome, Rise and Fall of an Empire, is quite good. And overall, I'd give this, because it had a few English historians in it. The thing that frustrates me about these docos is the way that they used to be made for, and they still are probably, for advert breaks. So there'd be a pause, obviously there's no adverts in this, and then the cut happens where the advert would be, and then the documentary carries on, but you come back and you get an instant recap of something that you've just heard, and that used to frustrate the heck out of me. So yeah, that's two in Rome. This one here was another History Channel one, Dead Men's Secrets, and this was actually quite good. Secret Stories of World War II, and it sounds kind of conspiratorial, but it's actually not, and it's got a whole swag of, let me see if I can show you this whole swag of DVDs in there, different episodes, and they're actually quite long. So the shortest one's 45 minutes, some of them are an hour and a half long each, so they're quite substantial docos, and they cover things like the various plots to kill Hitler, that's an episode, Stalin's spy ring and the secrets of the Y service, tracking the Nazi gold, but controversial after what happened there. Whatever happened to Raoul Wallenberg? Wallenberg, man, awesome. That was one of the reasons why I bought this, was because of that. Where is it? That documentary, actually. Whatever happened to Raoul Wallenberg? Because Wallenberg, I remember one of my fondest memories as a kid was my dad let us stay up and watch the mini-series about Wallenberg. It was broadcast on New Zealand TV. I don't know where it was made. It's made in Europe, I think, somewhere. and I think it was like 6 hours long or something like that, and it was in parts, sort of hour and a half parts. And I still I have a sort of fond recollection of that. And Raoul Wallenberg his work in Saving Jews was quite amazing. Secrets of the Sea Wolves, Operation Bodyguard, D-Day Deception, the mysterious death of General Sikorsky, America, and the mob. The mob plans to go and knock off Hitler. That was actually quite interesting. There's some good stuff in there. And then two more from the History Channel section of my documentary DVD collection. Spartans, The Last Stand of the 300. This was actually quite good. So, The Last Stand of the 300, this was put out around the time that the movie came out, the adaptation of Frank Miller's comic book. And this was actually not a bad little recreation, and they were clearly borrowing from that sort of stylistic imagery. But it's actually quite good. It gives you the full history, and it tells you the things that the movie left out. It wasn't simply 300 Spartans. And yeah, it was quite decent. It's about an hour and a half long, I think. How long is that? And it tells me somewhere. Man, back in the day, remember when you used to look at a DVD to figure out how long it was? Here we go. It doesn't tell me, but I'm pretty sure it's about an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes. So it's a decent doco. And then there's this one here. Why did I take that out? I don't know. Another multiple DVD set. Hold on, let me put this back in. It says making an absolute meal of this. Here we go. No, I put it in the other way. What a fool. Oh, I know why I did that. Yes. Okay, so this is the Barbarians 1 and 2. And the Barbarians series was another History Channel thing, but it was quite good. Similar to the Rome one, and some good historians and some substantial content in there about the various barbarian tribes. Again, the frustrating thing about the History Channel documentary stuff is that it's made for TV, and so, as I said, you get a pause in the doco where there would normally be an ad break, and then immediately they resume, and they immediately resume to give you the sort of summary you would get after you've come back from an ad break. You know, the whole idea is catching people who've just tuned in to catch them up. And so there's several times throughout the episode that happens. Now, moving into my stack of more favoured collections, I'm a big fan of early U2. U2 today frustrate me, but early U2 I'm a big fan of, and so you got to have Rattle and Hum in your collection if you're a fan of U2. It is one of the consummate musical documentaries. It was you. This was peak U2. This was U2 before Bono just decided that he was a politician first and a musician second. And the music was phenomenal that they were producing then. Man, I remember the Joshua Tree tour when it came to New Zealand. Those were the days. Those were the days, kids. Walking uphill in the snow for 5 miles. Man, some kids today are going to have some great stories to tell. I remember avoiding the corona. Okay. Too soon? Too soon. This one here was one of those ones that I told you about that I picked up in a bargain bin. I picked this up for 50 cents. It's called Salute. And can you see that? For the record, Salute. And obviously it's about that incident, that famous incident at the 1968 Olympics, where the two American athletes had their gloves on and did the Black Power Fist. This is not about them. So you see that photo a lot. This is about this guy here. And he was the Australian who was with them at the time. And what's his name? Peter Norman. And Peter Norman, all he did was wear a little pin to show solidarity with them. And his whole entire Olympic career was destroyed by it. He didn't say anything. He didn't do anything. He didn't do the salute. And that was it. And so his grandson, I think it was his grandson, made this documentary. He was still so out of favour, simply for standing on a podium with a pin on, that they didn't even invite him to be part of the 2000 Olympics that they had at Sydney? It was a big deal. They didn't even invite him to be involved. And his achievement on the track was phenomenal. In the world of track and field, what he achieved is still considered like top level stuff. It was amazing he was even on that podium. And what he did for Australia, one of the greatest Australian athletes, but because he did that, he was spawned. It was interesting. But the doco itself is really interesting. It's made by his grandson. Technically, it's not the greatest doco ever. I think it's online even if you want to watch it. But so there's some little technical issues with audio here and there. But what's interesting, and I think what's fair about it, is he goes and interviews. There's a guy who was on the team with his granddad at the time, around the same time, and he's scathing of him. He was an American actually, who was at the same Olympics, and he's scathing of Peter Norman. He shouldn't have done it. It was politicizing it, and so he presents those views. It's not all one sided, but it's interesting to see. Particularly for me, I think the right to protest is actually an important thing. So even though I think Colin Kaepernick or Colin Kaepernick, depending on how you want to say it, there's some things you can point to and critique about his actions. I never understood people attacking him for protesting. I believe that freedom of conscience is an important thing, and even people I disagree with have the right to freedom of conscience, and I think it's an important thing. But for this guy, all he did was wore a pin, and that was it. He was game over. So it's an interesting doco, very interesting. And as I said, it was made by an amateur, so it doesn't sort of do the professional thing. It's not highly politicized. If this documentary was made by someone who was working for Netflix or was funded by Netflix or any of those kind of situations, or it was made by someone like Michael Moore, it would have been a mess. It would have been just this highly politicized load of garbage. This is made by his grandson, so it's just an honest look at it, and it gives you, I think, a more balanced and fair perspective. The next two are put out by the Kaleidoscope Home Entertainment Group. I don't know what channel they appeared on, but I love these. So the first one was Nazi Collaborators, and this is a doco series. So in here, there's, what do we got? DVDs falling out left, right, and centre. That's what we've got. So in here, as you can see, there's 4 DVDs, but there's multiple episodes. I think we've got 13 episodes. And they're interesting. They're people who collaborated with the Nazis. From the IRA collaborating with them, the Croatian collaborator, the Greek collaborator. It's interesting. The Grand Mufti, the Arabic collaborator who hated the Jews. And they did another series as well, which I've got, which I also thought was even better, which was this one here, Nazi Hunters. And Nazi backside. Mike C. James says not soon enough about my joke earlier on. Michael Moore is basically a communist. Yeah, when I was younger, I watched Bowling for Columbine, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so outrageous. How could they do this? This is shocking. This is really bad. This man's uncovered the world's greatest evil. I should have known. I was a bit young and a bit naive and a bit immature about these things. And then I did a bit more reading, and I discovered that he'd completely misrepresented the facts, and he'd told untruths. And I was like, right, that's it. Never trusting that guy again. And I'm glad I took that stance early on, because quite frankly, yeah. And I would add that I think that he is a classic Chardonnay socialist, or limousine liberal, if you like. He's a guy who lives a life of privilege and wealth, but then wants to condemn everyone else because they're not him, even though they're, for doing the same things. It's just hypocritical. I've got no time for that. This one here, Nazi Hunters, was again same thing. 13 episodes. But what it is, it's the interesting what they did after the war, when they went hunting for various Nazis, particularly the high-profile ones, but the various Nazi hunting that went on, and so they could be put on trial and other things. It's interesting. There was a case, you might remember, was it last year or the year before, where one of the guards at one of the camps, was he a guard? He was a low level, but he was in his 90s or something, and they finally caught this guy, and they were putting him on trial. And I felt a little bit uneasy about that. I believe, I don't believe there's a time limit on justice, but I do think that a guy in his 90s who's clearly he was knocking at death's door, and who had been a guard in the camp, this is something that there's disagreements I had with Nelson Mandela. Some of his ideology was a bit of an issue, but you can't fault Nelson Mandela for the whole idea that he was trying to promote of reconciliation rather than sort of revenge, that there had to be sort of almost an armistice so you could rebuild a society again. You couldn't just stay on a revenge footing, and once you'd got justice, then go looking for revenge against people. And I just felt that one case was one too far, but these ones were not. These were actual serious, high-level, high-ranking Nazis, and straight after the war, who tried to get away with what they were. It's interesting, Dr. Mengele, Joseph Mengele, well-known in the Nazi eugenics program and all those awful experiments and other things that he did. Dr. Joseph Mengele, not a lot of people know this, but after the war, he escaped and fled, and then he took up a new life it was in South America, wasn't he? And he became an abortionist. Yeah, interesting, eh? Some might say an appropriate fit for a man like that. Ontivus says, Michael Moore's content has aged like milk. It does get worse, eh? And when that whole thing in Bowling for Columbine, where he just out and out lied. Now, the one thing I haven't got with you, CGN says, I think she's seen some of that doc on the History Channel. Didn't Fahrenheit 11/9 bomb financially? I remember PJW roasting him for having 9 effing houses. Yeah, he's really wealthy. So he did 9/11, and then he did 11/9. Like, that was it. That when he did that, I knew it was game over. And I'll tell you why I knew it was game over, because he took an existing documentary that had nothing to do with... So 9/11 was obviously about Bush and 9/11. Then he goes and makes 11/9 that's got nothing to do with that. Instead, it's about Trump and everything else, Trump-related. And he just ripped off his own He couldn't even think of a new title. He just ripped off his own pre-existing documentary title. And I thought, yeah, it's game over at this point. He's not even trying anymore. He's gone from propaganda to low-level propaganda. It was embarrassing. Isn't it always like this? The room I was born in is 700 meters from the room Karl Marx was born in. Wow. I know his family's house, so let's say houses. They had 2. They both survived British bombings. Yeah, Marx. What's interesting too is a lot of people don't realise is that by the end of his life and living in England, Marx was playing the stock market. And this is the thing a lot of people don't realise. Marx, there's no doubt, I think he's seeing some serious injustices that are happening in society at the time. But in typical fashion, his solution is not good. His solution, he sees the right problem, the solution is the very wrong solution. Now, by the end of his life, this is what a lot of people who are diehard Marx fans don't realise, is that by the end of his life, he was playing the stock market. And also by the end of things, he was basically saying that the problems he saw at the beginning had now largely been resolved. So the fact that people would still persist with communism when its own founder and creator, the guy who made it what it was, by the end of his life had said, well, I don't think the social conditions are such now that warrant that same level of response. I think it makes it all the more absurd, the evil of what's going on. Yeah, Trump did, He called out Bush for 9/11, exactly, decades ago. So the whole thing was just bizarre. But that was it, Remember that? Everyone was Trump derangement syndrome. Now, the documentary series I don't have in front of me, it's sitting in the lounge, and I'm not going to go and get it for you, because you'll be sitting here watching an empty screen, is When We Left Earth. It is a great documentary series. My young son, he's 7, he loves it, big into space stuff. And it's about the NASA program, from the beginning of the program to the, getting man on the moon, then the space station and stuff like that. And it's such a well-made documentary. Gary Sinise, remember Gary Sinise? Good old Gary Sinise. He narrates it, and it's so well put together. And as I said, my boy and I, it's just, it's a favourite pastime of ours. Anything space-related. He's now got into war. So I've just got 1917. It's finally arrived, my digital copy here in New Zealand. And my wife hasn't seen it yet, so I'm going to watch it with her on the weekend. But My son has already said to me, Dad, can we watch that together? I said, maybe when you're a little bit older, son. Please, Dad. He's already seen the first 15 minutes with me. Okay, so now carrying on with what I'm getting into, I'm now getting into the sort of the more favoured collection, the more favoured part of my collection, and I think this one here deserves a special mention. This is a documentary called The Dropbox. You may not have heard of this, but this is phenomenal. It's about an hour and 20 minutes long, and I watched this documentary just thinking, oh yeah, it's going to be. Here's the story. He's in Korea, South Korea. He's an old Christian minister, and what was happening was women who were in desperate situations were abandoning their babies on the streets, newborn babies, and he was like, we can't allow this to happen. They can't be left to die on the streets. So he set up on the side of his house in Korea a Dropbox. And you have some of them in the States now. I didn't realise this till recently, but it's been a tradition in the United States that any woman who felt that she couldn't cope with a baby, like a newborn child, or she was desperate, she could take it to a fire station. It's sort of been a long-standing tradition. So a lot of fire stations have got this sort of thing as well. But he created this Dropbox in South Korea on the side of his home. It's this insulated box. And any woman who is desperate, he said, look, if you don't leave your child to die on the streets in a gutter somewhere, bring it to the Dropbox. And if they put it in there, a heating lamp comes on, an alarm sounds in his house, and they go and they take the child and they rescue it, and then they go through the process normally of getting the child adopted out and stuff like that. It's what makes this so amazing. I won't spoil it for you because it is a phenomenal documentary. What makes it so amazing is that this guy who's in his 70s, or he was at the time this was made, he's got his own health issues, and he's got his own, I won't reveal the big reveal for you, but there's a big reveal about his own family life that makes his commitment to doing good, this humanitarian work, even more profound. It is so amazing. Every time I watch this, I'm in tears at the end of it. It's such an amazing documentary, and I think it's a new documentary. It's well worth watching. It was put out by a Christian group. The guy who made it wasn't a Christian, but he had quite a profound change of heart and experience while making the documentary. It's really high quality. It's a beautiful story of a man doing really profound humanitarian work, and I'd highly recommend it. So The Dropbox, if you haven't seen it, well worth checking out. This is, if you can get your hands on this documentary series, you should get it. The World at War. The World at War. Now, this was obviously a book as well, but the World of War documentary series, British made. If you can get your hands on this, then you should. It's not available. I had to order this online and pay a bit more for freight to get it from. I think I had to get it from. Was it the UK? I'm trying to remember where I got it from. But basically, open that up. You'll see you've got 2 box sets and there's 6 discs in each set, so there's quite a lot of documentary in here, quite a lot. Now, 5 in that one, sorry, 6 in the other one. This is really good. Now, what makes The World at War so good as a documentary series is the fact that it was made in the early 70s, and they were interviewing people who were still alive. It was actually living memory documentary stuff. People who lived through it, who participated in it. They interviewed German soldiers. They interviewed Germans who were pro-Hitler. It's absolutely fascinating. The everything else that has come after that is basically either they've got very limited access to these people because a lot of them are older and they died, or it wasn't as close to the docu. So this is really good. Yeah, C. James says it's it's brilliant. It really is good, eh? I haven't read the book. I know people rave about the book, but the DVD, The World at War, is phenomenal. It was a cult classic, I know, in the UK and here in New Zealand. It had a really cult classic thing. It was one of those TV, it broadcast on TV. The theme song was Sir Laurence Olivier. narrated it, and the theme song was like, it was one of those things you knew, it was stuck in your head. It was like, oh, it's World at War time. So yeah, it was. I'd highly recommend that. Highly recommend that. Under Decent 8 says now there are pet drop boxes and horse drop boxes as well for people who can't afford to get their animals. Is that true? I didn't know that. We've got a pet drop box at our house. It's called the freezer. That sounds horrible, doesn't it? I didn't mean that. We don't eat cats. I know some Vietnamese people, they're good friends of mine, and in Vietnam they farm and they eat dogs, certain breeds of dog. They eat it. It's a staple there. And apparently it's quite delicious. It's quite my Vietnamese friends, they tell me how they love it. It's apparently it's like pork. It's not something we do here, obviously, but there you go. McDonald's. Dad joke. Okay. Now we're getting into the final four. These are my real favourites. So this here, I absolutely love. I found this again in a bargain bin, and I'm so glad I found it. This is some documentaries you watch. I'm now getting into the territory of documentaries that are, for me anyway, that I rewatch over and over again, as opposed to the documentaries that might sit in your collection and get an earring every now and then, or I've added to my collection thinking, oh, that'd be good for my children to watch so they can learn about history. So this documentary is one of those ones that I watch regularly. It is the true story of Black Hawk Down. You can see that. As it says on there, it's an Emmy Award nominated documentary, and it is phenomenal. So you've got the guy who wrote the book, he's part of the documentary. You've got guys who actually were who survived. Some of the Strucker, Sergeant Strucker, the guys who are, if you've seen Black Hawk Down, the real life people, and it tells their stories, and it gives so much of the extra information that Ridley Scott didn't really. I mean, it's a film, so it doesn't have time to put it into the film. It gives you the extra information, and it also has, it's interesting, there's this interesting through line in this documentary of, they interview Somalians as well. There's a guy who actually was in the US Marines who's now back in Somalia as a political leader. But it's a fascinating doco, and it also presents the Somalian side, because Black Hawk Down, I think, was that rescue was amazing. Some of the US actions leading up to it were not good though. When they tomahawk missiled that meeting of political leaders, that was an absolute disaster. But this incident, there's no doubting, there was genuine courage and heroism on the part of the men who were involved in this. I just said, my Vietnamese friend's dad said dog has too many vitamins and gives him gout, so he stopped eating it. It's, of all the reasons that you wouldn't eat dog, it's got too many vitamins. It's too nutritious, so I stopped eating dogs. The McRib. That's classic. This is the second one, and it is very similar. This is another documentary series that I watch, a documentary film. It's an hour and a half, just like this Black Hawk Down one is. It also, I think this one might have been, no, this one wasn't Emmy Award nominated, I don't think, like the other one was. But this is a phenomenal documentary that I rewatch over and over again, and it is SAS Behind Iraqi Lines. Now, this is about the first Gulf War, Operation Desert Storm, and it's the true story of the Andy McNabb SAS mission that went to pot. When they got dropped behind enemy lines, they were not well supplied as it was. They were there, they were the Scud busters who were there. Remember the Scud missiles? Their job was to go and take out the Scud missile sites. They were dropped well behind enemy lines, these SAS units, and it was a very effective strategy, actually. Very effective strategy. But these guys were dropped. They were given the wrong radio frequency, so they couldn't communicate back. They were dropped in a place where they shouldn't have been. They end up with they're in a wadi, which is a riverbed in Iraq, and they have a shepherd boy who comes along and discovers them. There's a shepherd boy, I think, who sees them, and then the next thing you know, they think they've got away with it, and then a couple of hours later, a truckload of troops turn up and start firing on them, and then just sort of the madness ensues from there, and they're trying to survive. They have to survive. They effectively, what they end up with is the guys who did survive, because some of them died. There was a Kiwi, actually. There was a New Zealander in this SAS unit. they had to walk out. They walked for hundreds of kilometres. So it's the Bravo 20 mission. And it's well worth watching because you've got McNabb and he puts his side of it. Chris Ryan is interviewed as well, though. Those who don't know Andy McNabb, is an interesting character. His face is, he doesn't do public, I still think this is the case, I believe. I could be wrong by now, but he certainly up until very recently, he was never doing public interviews with his face exposed. He's kept his identity a secret. He was involved in Michael Mann's Heat, the movie Heat. He choreographed, particularly that scene you see, the shootout in the bank. He choreographed that, and he trained all of those actors for that. That's why it looks so realistic. There was a naturalism to the way it was shot. But he's also a controversial character, and so they've got him, but they've also got Chris Ryan, who was part of that. Chris Ryan does show his face. He wrote a book about it, like Andy McNabb. He's quite open about who he is, taking a different stance. Chris Ryan also wrote that TV series. What's that British TV series? I'm trying to remember the name of it now, but it's had quite a few seasons about SAS guys. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a good doco. This is a really and there's some real courage in this again. CJM says Churchill's Bodyguard documentary is a cool one. I don't know that one. So what's it called, CJM? And this is the last two. And these two for me are absolute favourites. They are gold standards for me. I don't watch them regularly, but I do go back and watch them, and I'm looking forward to sharing them with my kids. They are both Ken Burns, the great Ken Burns. Before I talk about these, let me tell you that there's one documentary maker who, to my shame, I don't have any of his stuff in my collection, and that is Errol Morris. Errol Morris, The Thin Blue Line was his first big one. Phenomenal. Errol, that's right, CJam, that series that Chris Ryan created is called Strike Back. So Chris Ryan was an actual SAS soldier and he's a writer. And an actor too, he's been in a few things. But Errol Morris, his first big documentary was The Thin Blue Line. If you haven't seen it, go and see it. And he made The Fog of War, was it Unknown Knowns? What Errol Morris did, though, was Errol Morris completely revolutionised documentary filmmaking, and that he created that style of documentary you see a lot more of today with recreations and really good high-quality musical scores, like orchestral scores, that really capture the emotional sense. It wasn't just dry facts and dry sort of, pretty rudimentary recreations and people sitting there talking to the camera. There was he created a narrative, a really powerful, compelling narrative. G'day, Darth Shady. You've missed a few songs. We're talking about my documentary collection at the moment. Don't panic, there's going to be a couple more songs in a minute. But to my shame, I don't have any Errol Morris. Undertason says you've missed everything, literally everything. So Errol Morris, if you want to watch, and if you haven't seen Errol Morris, start with The Thin Blue Line. As I said, it's a bit. I count it a shame that I don't have any of his stuff. But these two are my favourites. These are the final two in my documentary collection. They're both Ken Burns. The first is the Civil War. When the New York Times, we don't put much stock in the New York Times, but when the New York Times says that this is a revelation, they're not wrong. Look at this. How classic is this, though? Back in the day. when documentaries, this was like high quality artwork. It looks like someone's Windows 95 clip art, doesn't it? But this is phenomenal. The Civil War, with these original letters, the Ken Burns effect was invented by Ken Burns. You have it on your video editing software now. If you do any video editing, the Ken Burns effect, where you zoom in on a photograph or you slide sideways or slide up or down, that Ken Burns effect was invented by this guy, and he took all these photographs and platelets. It's quite amazing too that you could make a documentary about this documentary. They had old Civil War photographs. They managed to track down old plates. There was a guy who had old Civil War plates, the glass plates from photography, and these really important historical photographs, the plates for them, And he had them in a glass house as panes of glass in a glass house. So, yeah, it's quite, there's a whole backstory of this documentary, but this is a phenomenal documentary about the Civil War that, yeah, it doesn't matter if you're American or where you're from, you should watch this. You absolutely watch. You do have to watch the replay. But you absolutely have to watch this documentary to get a history, a really good history of the Civil War. This is my favourite Ken Burns, though, of all time. My wife bought this for me for a Christmas present. It's quite a few years ago now. But I watched it online first. And I think I rented it. Actually, it's The War. And it is phenomenal. There's just no other way to describe this documentary series. I love this photograph, by the way, this sort of juxtaposition, because it sums up so perfectly what the documentary was about. So you've got these two guys at the top burying one of their comrades in arms over on the front, and then you've got this lady here who's back at home with her, pictures of her family, and obviously the assumption she's listening into the wireless. And this is very much what this documentary does. It, by the way, check out this photo. I love this photo. This is one of my favourites. You might have seen this photo around. I had this as my Facebook profile for a long time. A guy standing in a bombed out church. I think it's in France. I knew a guy actually was a tank driver in World War II. He's dead now, but he was a classic Kiwi guy. And he went into one of those churches and he brought back some of the relics from the church. We always used to have him on about it. Like, mate, don't they need those back? He said, someone had to save them, otherwise the Nazis would have got them. But what's so good about this documentary series, The War, is that, again, it's that Ken Burns style, but there's beautiful use of orchestral scoring, and the people are actually telling their stories from letters, from newspaper columns. Tom Hanks is in this, by the way. Josh Lucas, Bobby Cannavale, Samuel L. Jackson, Eli Wallach, Adam Arkin, Kevin Conway, Rebecca Holtz. So there's some big names in this who do narration, and it is, it's a long documentary series, but it's so worth it to give you. It's the American side of it, obviously, but it's so well told, eh? It's so well told, and you really get a sense for me, it was like watching 1917. 1917 immerses you in the World War I trench life in a way that no other movie or documentary I'd ever seen had. Obviously, 1917 is a movie, but it gave you, for me, a greater appreciation of what those trenches and living in that actual geographical landscape would have been like for those men, and how challenging that would have been. This one gave me this great appreciation for the way the war played out in America, in a way that, I knew the basics and I know my war history, but this gave me a deeper appreciation for how pivotal certain things were in certain moments were, and just how seminal they were really in that struggle. So I'd highly recommend that. Absolutely well worth your time. On to Destin 8 says, have you heard about the lip reading project? A professional lip reader watches World War I film material from when they filmed the soldiers in the trenches and translates what they said. No, I haven't heard about that at all. These films didn't have sound, so their words were lost, but can be recreated. That's amazing. It'll be interesting to know how accurate it was, because the frame rate as well was different in a lot of that footage. There's a lovely family that whenever I go and do work in Sydney, Australia, that quite often I stay with them at their house, and their grandfather, or actually the father of the people I stay with, he was involved in one of those photography units, and they were telling me this great story. He didn't really boast about his work at all, but there's this great story he sort of mentioned, we had a bit of a near miss one day on a carrier, and one day they saw his footage in a documentary, and it was absolutely his footage, there's no doubt about it. And they saw his footage in a documentary of this incident. We had a near miss, he said, and it was unbelievable that he this plane crashes and explodes. It wasn't a near miss. It was phenomenal. And so they said it gave them this great appreciation for just how heroic that effort was. But he was involved in one of those units. Darth Shady says, my grandparents fought in the world wars in Poland. Wow, what a connection, man. And that Polish resistance, amazing stuff. I'm going to, before we finish up, have a few more comments. I'll play you this original song I've written, and then I'll play you another cover to lead us out. If you want to leave a tip, please use the PayPal jar in the link below. You can do that. Leave a tip in the PayPal jar. I'll tell you a little story about the song. I'm going to put the lyrics up on screen so you can see them, but I'll tell you a little story about the song before I play it to you. I wrote this song last weekend. I was in a bit of a dissident mood. I've been a little bit frustrated by... So last week a conversation started in the public square in New Zealand about how long is the lockdown going to remain in place. And basically saying the longer the lockdown remains, the greater the economic harms will be, and that then will cause death. Because if your health system can't afford to function properly, if people can't get healthcare treatment, people will get stuck inside, they lose their jobs, suicide, healthcare, all those kind of things start to take a nosedive. And so I believe there's a careful balancing act here. A lot of people are acting as if coronavirus is a zero-sum game, as if it's like the example I've seen is the parachute. Jump out of a plane, you put a parachute on, you don't take the parachute off till you've got to the ground. But that's not what coronavirus is like. It's not one way everyone gets saved and the other way we all start dying. Coronavirus is a balancing act, and there's competing goods and competing evils, competing risks here we've got to try and mitigate. And so lives are going to be lost either way. And so you've got to try and figure out how do we keep people safe from coronavirus, but at the same time, in our efforts to keep people safe, we don't create a response that is actually worse and does more harm and kills more people than the virus would. How do you try and keep that in check? It's a kind of complicated thing. And people, I posted about this. I've been blogging a little bit on a blog I've started called The Plague Journal. And I wrote what I thought was a well-considered article, basically saying, the title of the article was, "No, you are not evil for wanting the lockdown to end." Because everyone was saying, you're an evil, greedy capitalist if you want the lockdown to end. And it's just not true. It's just not true. And so I was a bit frustrated by that. And then someone contacted me out of the blue, that a person I hadn't spoken to in years, a friend of mine, and he said, I read your article. He said, "Thank you for writing that." He said, "I just want to let you know, at my place of work here in New Zealand, they just let a whole lot of people go because the way the lockdown was managed, they weren't classed as an essential service. They probably should have been, actually, but they weren't. So they had to sack a whole lot of staff because they can't afford to keep functioning." Now, one of those staff members who was sacked, it was about a week ago, has already taken his own life. And he's not the only one. There have been multiple suicides as a result of this in my country already. And so it's serious, and it's not to label people who want to solve that problem as evil and greedy and horrible, nasty capitalists is just vile. So I wrote a song in response to that. I'm going to put the lyrics up on screen so you can see it, called The Cure. And this is my, I guess this is me in a particular mood, sat down, I wrote. It's one of those songs that took me about half an hour to write. Where are we? Here we go. So you should be able to see the lyrics up on screen now. I told my friend to stay at home, said that would save him from the plague. He said he can't go to work and make a buck, and if he loses his job, that's just bad luck. 'Cause we're saving you, my friend. We're saving you, my friend. We're saving you, my friend, for a better end. Oh, we're saving you, my friend. We're saving you, my friend. We're saving you, my friend, for a better end. I told him he can't drive alone in his car to commune with his mother and his pa. They said no solitary walking at the beach, or his neighbors would have to call police. Because we're saving tried. He just won't pick up that phone. I sure hope he's following rules and staying home. 'Cause we're saving you, my friend. We're saving you, my friend. Saving you, my friend, for a better end. Oh, we're saving you, my friend. We're saving you, my friend. We're saving you, my friend, for a better end. And I'm sure they'll congratulate themselves and declare that they saved the whole damn world. Now if only our absent friends were here, they could wonder at the marvel of our care. Because we're saving you, my friends. We're saving you, my friends. Saving you, my friends, for a better end. Oh, we're saving you, my friends. We're saving you, my friends. We're saving you, my friends, for a better end. And with a cure that's several years away, are we just gonna keep on living this same way? Or will we wake ourselves one day and realize that fear can't win the day? So yeah, I wrote that song, as I said, after a guy contacted me and told me about a friend of his, a workmate, who had taken his own life because he'd lost his job. And for me, I quite frankly, I don't think that those concerns can be dismissed. They're legitimate, they're real. Already this morning in our newspapers, they're talking about how doctors are now preparing for a massive wave of healthcare that has been put off over these past 4 weeks, and that's going to swamp them as well. It's like, this is not a zero-sum game. This is not a zero-sum game. And it's just childish and completely irrational to think about it and talk about it in that way. To say, well, if we all stay inside, that solves everything. It doesn't, actually. It doesn't. It's part of the solution. Social distancing does matter. But quite frankly, we can't continue to live as a human society. We can't continue to live this way forever. You just can't. Sooner or later, you're going to have to venture outdoors. Sooner or later, you're going to have to sort of take risks again. It's just the reality of it. Guy Random says Jacinda Ardern is our Prime Minister, for those who don't know, is going to tell us what we're allowed to do at level 3 soon. Welcome to the People's Democratic Republic of Cindy's Kindy. It does, I almost wrote a song about that. 1 p.m. every day in New Zealand, we have our little updates about from the Prime Minister. It's broadcast live and live streamed. And a friend of mine said to me the other day, he said, very astute businessman, and he said, my wife and I, we haven't tuned into any of them. We've just sort of read newspaper reports. We haven't tuned into, but we tuned into our very first one on Monday when they announced whether they were going to let us out of lockdown. And he said to me, oh my gosh, it was the most patronising thing I've ever experienced. And it kind of is. So I was writing a little ditty, a play school type children's program ditty about it, about it being 1 p.m. It's time to see who's got coronavirus, whether we're free. And I had all these little verses about it. Is it you? Is it me? Because, yeah, it is a bit odd. There's things that are interesting about the New Zealand experience. So in level 4, they've allowed certain businesses to open, but they're only allowed to sell what they consider essential goods. And to me, that's strange. Like, these are online sellers too, not stores. So, like, bookstores are allowed to online sell you books, but only certain books. And I think that, to me, that's so strange. I don't see how, if you're allowed to not let those retailers who are online, they're not meeting customers, why not let people order any book they want to online while they're stuck in a house? It's such a bureaucratic way of looking at things. It's safe enough for you to go back into a workplace. It's safe enough for you to sell books to people, but only certain books are considered essential during this time of crisis. It's like, that's dumb. And then, of course, and I'm sure they'd probably make some silly bureaucratic argument about, well, if you have more book orders, you might have to have more staff members there. It's like the risk is already there, and you can mitigate that risk. If you can mitigate staff member risk for 10 staff members, surely you can mitigate it for 15. It's not like 10 are any safer than 12, and I bet you most of those businesses have got all of their staff members there, not some of them anyway. But anyway, the other thing too is online suppliers of technical equipment. So obviously at the moment you can do online schooling in New Zealand, and so they're using Zoom and they're using Skype and they're using various different bits of online software, and they're live streaming and everything else. What do you need for live streaming if you're going to do it properly? Well, I'll tell you what you need. You need a good quality camera. You need a good quality microphone if you're going to do it properly, right? A good condenser mic, that's what you need. Well, you can buy computers. You can buy computer peripheries. You can buy mouses, you can buy basic webcams or even sort of more expensive webcams, but that's it. You can't buy condenser microphones, USB condenser microphones. You can't buy HDMI cameras or things like HDMI capture units. Like, so many businesses, even right now, are dependent on this stuff. So the suppliers who supply you these essential goods, they're allowed to sell you online again. Online retailers, they're allowed to sell you the computer mouse, the computer bag, the laptop, the webcam, but the same retailers who sell stuff like this, they're not different retailers, same outfits who do the whole lot. They can't sell you a good quality video camera. They can't sell you a condenser mic. How does that make any sense? Sorry, everyone's hearing that thump as I pick up the microphone. Sorry about that. It doesn't make any sense. Look, I was interviewed for another live stream podcast thing the other day, Monday night. And I was interviewed about what do I think about the fact that in New Zealand, there's no priests allowed to go to dying people. You're not allowed, no ministers are allowed to go to their dying people to give them last rites. As far as I'm concerned, that is inhumane. It lacks humanity. It's outrageous. Even if you want to make the case that some, like a coronavirus patient's too risky, people are dying of other things that are not coronavirus. And to say, no, they can't have a priest go to their deathbed, I think is absolutely outrageous. And to me, it's like, well, what sort of brave new world are we creating here? This cold, sterile, die by yourself, no existential peace in your passing. It's rubbish. It's not humanity at all. And I'm in favour of social distancing and appropriate measures that restrict movement for safety. But that is going too far. So I was on a podcast, I was interviewed about it, I was asked, what do I think about it? And I said, one of the big mistakes that I think has been made in this whole thing is they've got the classification of essential versus non-essential. I think that's the wrong way to think about it. What I think they should have done was had a classification of safe versus unsafe. Because essential versus non-essential is purely subjective. You get a small bureaucratic committee of people in your government who sit down to decide these things at a time like this, and they sit there and they subjectively go, do we think that this is essential? What they should have been, the criteria that should have been used was, is this safe? Can it be done safely? And if they'd asked that question, then there's no doubt that more businesses would have been able to remain open like they have in Australia, because there are a lot of businesses that could operate safely. And so as long as they met the safety criteria, they could have remained open. You could do things like administering the last rites to dying people because you can do that safely. I've talked to medical professionals who've told me you can do this safely. So there was a typical bureaucracies, whenever they try and solve problems. Eben Hawke says, I was able to get the Adventures of Tintin, like the books. Yeah, audiobooks are good too, aren't they? A friend of mine, my wife actually, she's a good friend of mine. She's such a good friend. We're friends with benefits. We were talking about this the other night. She's not a fan of ebooks. She reads. My wife reads so much, but ebooks she can't do. So, and I think that if you're going to allow people to buy books, then why not let them buy books? Why not actually let them buy any book? If you've got a bookseller who's opening for online book sales, not customers in a store, online book sales, why not let them sell any book in that stock room? It's just, does that make any sense? Doesn't make any sense. Those books in the stockroom, you're not allowed to sell, but those books on the other side of the stockroom, you are allowed to sell. Aren't they selling microwaves now? Didn't they change that rule? So initially you weren't allowed to buy any essential items, necessary items like that. But then now they've changed that, so you've got to. They can actually you can actually buy those things now. Wowzers! I've just got all these news updates come flying in. So yeah, things like clothes. We're heading into winter here in New Zealand. Things like children's clothing. So they changed the rules partway through, but they just rushed into it. And I get it. It was a world crisis. We didn't, you got to take precautions, and everyone looked at Italy and thought, oh my gosh, we're going to end up like that. But even then, it seems to me that in New Zealand we still had time. We actually still had time to evaluate and think about things, but our government was still mucking around with other legislation in the 2 weeks leading up to lockdown. I think that time should have been spent focused on, what this might look like, because it was pretty serious at that point, and around the globe it was obvious what was coming. I remember telling my wife weeks before, here's what I think is going to happen, and it did happen. Ping, ping, ping. It panned out exactly as I thought, because you don't have to be a genius to look at and actually take in information and analyze what is actually coming in from around the world and say, yep, here's a best guess estimate of what I think's coming next. You just have to be willing to do that. And sure enough, it did. It rolled out. And in fact, there was at one point several weeks before we got into lockdown, I said to my wife, I think that maybe you should go and do it was a Friday night. I think maybe you should go and do the shopping tonight, because I think that what's going to happen tomorrow is everyone's going to start panicking and there'll be panic buying. So don't panic buy, but just do our shopping before everything's essential's gone. Well, my wife said, oh, it'll be fine. It'll be all good. And I said, no, I think it's going to happen. And I was like, okay, you're the boss. Tomorrow morning it is then. So she went the next morning and she texted me as soon as she got there. And she said, it is insane here. Everyone is here trying to get what they can. So, yeah, human nature is a funny thing, but it can be quite predictable. Yeah, see, this is interesting, Poland was ahead of the curve, wasn't it? We were preparing for this months ago. We weren't. We've only been in lockdown since the 25th of March. Was it 25th of March we went into lockdown? So that's about 4 weeks ago. But in the lockdown itself was only announced on the Sunday before that. So we started on the Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. They only announced it on the Sunday before that. There were 2 weeks leading up to that where we knew this was an issue. They were already putting in place border restrictions, sort of very basic ones in our country. So like even the government didn't have any excuse. It couldn't say, oh, we didn't know. I travelled in early February. I had to go overseas in early February to Australia at the very start of February. And it was already in Australia at that point. And everyone was talking about it. I was on a flight right back at the beginning of February with people who were wearing protective masks and things from New Zealand going to Australia. Neither of those countries were considered high risk. It's not like someone flying from China or going to China. And there was an elderly couple next to me. I think they were elderly English couple who were all masked up, and I remember it on the flight. So people knew there was no excuse. There was no excuse. And so people say, oh, hindsight's always 20/20, but yeah, some things that's true in this case. But we also had a lot of lead-in time in New Zealand. There's no doubt we had lead-in time. That's interesting. I didn't know this. So Guy Random says only certain microwaves are deemed essential. Oh my gosh. How does that work? This is an essential microwave. This one here has a black front and it's got a silver back. That's not essential. The white one is though. How do you do that? This one cooks at a lower wattage. That's an essential microwave. This one cooks at a higher power output. That's not essential. How do you figure that out? That's insane. That is absolutely insane. And that's how you get people who are in desperate need having to pay stupid money for an essential item like a food cooking device, a microwave, because not every device is available to them. They're only limited in what they can choose. That's, oh man, I didn't realise that. I did not realise that. I know about the tech stuff because I've been trying to get a hold of some new tech. I need a new camera. Desperately need a new camera. So I'm trying to get a hold of a new camera, and I desperately need another web capture unit. So I'm trying to get a hold of these things. And man, you can't. It's like, nope, sorry, that's not an essential item. And I think about the fact that there's lots of workplaces who are doing stuff now online. So many are working online. Schools are now running lessons online. These are items that you need to do that well. So it just shows you that it was bureaucrats and not people who know what they're doing who are making up these rules. Yeah, a lot of people like that Thunder. They saw the meme, so I thought it was just BS. Let me finish before I play you a song and wrap things up, because it's been almost 2 hours now. Let me finish by talking about that parachute meme. You've seen that? Some of you seen the parachute meme that's doing the round. Someone mentioned it before. Tim Pool was talking about it apparently. I haven't seen Tim Pool's commentary, but you've seen that parachute meme. So everyone's sending it around on Facebook, and so what you've got is this meme, and it says that it compares the lockdown strategy to a parachute. You jump out of a plane, you pull the parachute ripcord, and the parachute slows your descent. And they've said the lockdown has slowed our descent. It's sort of lowered the curve. You don't take your parachute off just because you've slowed down. Now, that's a really, really funny thing to say, and people probably think they're being clever, but it's not logical. It is not the same thing. It's not a valid comparison, because jumping out of a plane is a zero-sum game. That means it's binary. It's either on or off. There's only one way you can go if you want to survive. If you jump out of a plane, that plane better be like sitting on the runway, or if it's up in the air at altitude and you jump out of it, you have to have a parachute. And then once the parachute is on, you can't take it off until you touch the ground, or very, very close to the ground. And so that's not what a lockdown in a time of pandemic is. A lockdown is trying to mitigate death, but the lockdown itself also causes death. So a better analogy would be this, and I've spent far too long thinking about this, but a better analogy would be this. You jump out of a plane with a parachute on, you land on a remote island where eventually you can be rescued, but not immediately. But this remote island also has those big wind turbine, the big propellers on stalks, the big wind energy generators. And they have massive propellers and they're flying around. Now you land on this island and it's like a high precipice, it's cliffs all around you. You're on a small patch of earth and there is a windstorm blowing, and you think, if I keep my parachute on, I'll be safe, because if I get blown off the island, off this precipice, this little bit of earth I'm on, if I get blown off that, I won't fall to my death. I will be able to float down to the rocks below and I won't get crushed and killed. And so you think, I better keep it on. But here's the flip side of keeping it on. If you keep the parachute on too long, then one of those gusts of wind, the wind as it goes on throughout the night is going to get stronger, and one of those gusts of wind will pick you up by the parachute that you're still wearing. It will collect you and it will throw you into one of those blades and you will be mangled to death. What do? That's what the lockdown in a time of pandemic is. What do? Two options, both carry big risks. And so you've got to navigate carefully those two options. Otherwise, one of them, as I said in a blog article I wrote the other day, a lot of people don't seem to have realized this has always been a war on two fronts. And if you lose on either front, you're in real trouble. So the first front is the virus. The second front is the social and economic side of it, keeping people locked down, economies flattening and collapsing into depression, people and social conditions for them being isolated and alone to the point of serious mental health crisis and worse. So those things, and people not able to access medical care and all the rest of it. So that's what you've got to do. You've got to navigate these two things. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say there's easy answers to this, because there's not. But that's why the parachute meme is just, it's not a valid thing. It's illogical. It's a really clever, silly sort of thing that does the rounds on social media, but it has no basis in logical thought. It's people who are not really thinking through properly the actual situation. Thank you, Darth Shady. I think that's a better analogy for it. Much better. Timple says, what if you are heading for a volcano, so you have a choice to keep your parachute on, hit volcano, or take it off and get a broken leg? Yeah, and that's another version of it. Onto Desson says 2 hours is by no means long enough. I have a Skype meeting in 6.5 hours though, and should try and get some sleep. Oh mate, you're a legend. You're an absolute legend. Good man. Darth Shady says I have to head out. Super time. Having a great evening. It's good to see you, Darth. I'm going to play one more song to lead us out. It's an oldie but a goodie, and then we'll call it a night. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. If you want to leave a tip, please use the tip jar below. I think I might get pinged for copyright. Good old Facebook. Yeah, we'll see how we go. But here is an oldie but a goodie to send us out on, which is Long Train Running. I'll just do this. Sorry. There we go. Everyone's hearing that microphone as I pick it up and put it down. Down around the corner, half a mile from here, you see them both feet run and you watch them disappear without love. Where would you be right now? Without love. I saw Miss Lucy down along the track. She lost her home and her family, and she won't be coming back without love. Where would you be right now? Without love. Well, the Illinois Central and the Southern Central Freight, you gotta keep on pushing, mama, 'cause you know they're running late. Where would you be right now? Without love. When the pistons keep on turning and the wheels go round and round, and the steel rails are cold and hard in the mile that they go down. Without love, where would you be right now? Na, 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 na. Without love. Without love, without love, where would you be right now? There you go. You can't beat a bit of the doobies. Everyone, yes, I will reiterate what CJ said. Everyone stay safe. Look after your loved ones. Stay sane. And thank you for tuning in. If you want to leave a tip, there's a PayPal link for the tip jar in the description below. You guys are awesome. And I will absolutely be seeing you next week. What I'm going to do next week is I'm planning to resume with trying to get back up and running a regular weekly video that's not just a live stream. So it's been so hectic for me. I apologize for that, those who are regular fans of the channel, and I've got a couple of good bits of content waiting to go. So yeah, please God, next week all going well, we'll be back on track again. But otherwise, I'll definitely still be back for another live stream. You guys are awesome. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.